Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Not Financial Advice. A lot of macro stuff to get into today, especially with what's going on in energy, what's going on in Europe, gas, Russia. So we're going to get right into it today. Russia has said until sanctions are released, they are not going to allow gas to flow into Europe or natural gas to flow into Europe, which is exacerbating energy prices, especially in the UK. That's one of the places that's getting hit the hardest. Sean, we've been talking about this on the show for a while now. Part of the reason we sent money to Ukraine was to sort of prepare for this situation. What are your thoughts and how do you think it's going to affect the macro as Russia? And do you think Russia actually is going to be this stubborn to not give gas until sanctions are off?
I think they're already being beyond stubborn. I think they've put their foot down and said, we're going to do what we want to do, full stop. When we first had these conversations months ago, frankly, these are some of the concerns we talked about on this very podcast. We talked about the ebb and flow of power between China, the US, and Russia. We talked about the need to make sure we're supporting our allies, not always because of direct benefit, but because of an indirect need to make sure that our partners are supported. We needed to make sure that we're tracking and tracing on the situation, staying close to it, and understanding the impact at a macro level across lots of different things. Lo and behold, here we are months later, and the politicians, instead of listening to this podcast, which they apparently should have been, they have not been helping the situation at all. So where we are right now is we are in a world that is straining for energy. Now, yes, it depends on who we're talking about and the type of energy, but we are in a world that's straining for energy. You and I on the East Coast, I'm starting to get letters and emails from National Grid saying things like, hey, from 9 to 2, can you try not to use your AC? That's the East Coast.
Really? I haven't gotten any of those. Wow,
Yeah,
that's happening.
it's
Wow.
happening. Yeah. So not necessarily threatening that there's going to be blackouts, but just threatening in general that we're really tight on the grid. I know we can talk more about the US side of it, but I think it's really interesting, right? Like we from the very beginning, when we kicked off a lot of these sanctions, there was a lot of tiptoeing going around where they were really hitting hard in certain ways, but then at the same time, like, well, I mean, like leave the pipeline alone. Don't bother them. Don't hammer away on energy. Stay away from the people who are controlling that. If you had told me that the Ukraine-Russian war would still be going on, I'm not going to say I would be shocked, but I'd be surprised at how much it is still going on. I think that this is a really big wake-up call, okay? For anyone who lives in the world but doesn't quite understand the impacts of war and energy and the global economy, this needs to be a wake-up call to a lot of people to understand that we are 100%, Amit, we talk about this on every episode, we are a global web. We are interconnected to everything that happens. It isn't always directly connected, but one way or another, all those strings of the web get back to someone somewhere. What's happening in Russia is a perfect example of the conversation we had a few weeks back, even a few months back now, that as power ebbs and flows between the largest superpowers, they have the ability to do things that are much more drastic than what people are used to thinking about. Now, when you think about what that means for a second here, we're talking about shutting off the Nord Stream pipe, okay? This is shutting off power. I don't think it's I want to make sure people understand this isn't like a halfway measure. This isn't a 10% measure. They're saying we are shutting off power. You're getting nothing, zero, zilch. So Germany is like, whoa, wait a minute. We have no power now. So now they're talking about doing drastic things like, they get to decide who's going to control energy now, right? Sort of that privatization of energy, which harkens back to a very bad time in the world. And the more and more we see these countries struggling to ensure they have energy, and on top of that, the ability to even have their people afford energy, which of course any good government wants to do, it's bringing up more and more problems. And specifically, we mentioned this on this show, at least on 2 episodes, probably more. We talked about the fact that the sanctions were never going to be enough in the first place. So we took yachts away from billionaires. Who cares? Russia's really proving a point here that they were so prepared for this, because ultimately you can shut down anyone's bank account, but if you don't shut down the way they make their money, they're just going to move to a different bank account. And that's what Russia really proved here. I thought this would be somewhat resolved at this point, to be totally honest. I think the conflicts take many years now, and I think people forget that sometimes because it falls off the news. By now, we would have had some celebrity story to make up for this, but we haven't had that because we have our own inflation issues. We have our own energy costs. So it's all becoming sort of this one big story around energy all the time. We just saw recently that folks in the UK, as an example, are paying almost 10x a month what they were paying before.
Yeah.
Combine that with inflation, combine that with an economy that's slowing down from a global perspective. And once again, who's getting pounded? The middle class is absolutely getting smashed and pounded, and they just want to work and pay their bills. And now, because of a war that seems so far away, they're the ones who are going to take the heat for it. And I don't want to belabor the point, but I think it just calls out that I think one of the things we've really tried to talk about here from an education perspective, right? Because it's not financial advice. We really want to educate the fact that nothing can ever be seen as standing alone. It has to be the way we look at things from a big picture perspective. So this is bringing back lots of conversations around nuclear power, around solar power, around geothermal, around wind, around wave, right? We're looking at all the different ways we can go and access power. Now, here in the US, where both of us are located, we are a net exporter, right? We have more energy than we can use. We're in a good spot. Our neighbors have energy they can use. They're in good spots. So it's very easy to take a stance and say, if we're good, why the hell should we care? Well, we need to care because these are our partners. These are who we do trade with. And it's not just a question of, whether or not we should send Ukraine money, or whether or not we should care that Germany is going to get pounded, or whether or not someone who works 2 jobs and has 3 kids and is trying to pay their energy bill in the UK, right? Why should all that matter? Well, it matters because these are our partners. These are where we do business. These are where we can travel and vacation. These are where we have people who are just trying to live and do the right things. And what happens is you start to hear things, and it's already happening, where like, well, China's heading up to Russia to work on some war games or practice some military drills. We've still got Taiwan has basically fallen off the news, but that's still really going on for those who aren't paying attention. And a lot of the problem is we're seeing countries like Italy, for example, that have essentially put a referendum on any idea of even the idea of nuclear energy is out the window. Forget it, cannot ever happen.
And the reason for that is ideological, or
It is personally ideological. Many people, and let's be fair, for good reason, in theory, are extremely fearful of nuclear power and nuclear energy. Because when we think about nuclear energy, if I went out right now and grabbed 10 people and I said, what do you know about nuclear power? They're going to say, if it's not Chernobyl, they're going to say Fukushima.
yeah.
And they're right. Those are insanely terrible, unbelievably bad things that happened. But you have to just stand back at some point and think, as we continue to grow the population, the energy needs of the planet, there cannot be this one pipe to feed them all mentality, which is what is currently happening. To think that Europe is now being brought to its knees over Russia attacking the Ukraine is pretty wild. I mean,
Yeah.
pretty wild. And if we're being frank here, in case anyone hasn't noticed who's watching this, the US, the UK have done nothing to slow this thing down.
Because we don't want to get into a World War III, right?
Well, we can't. I mean, when clear, it's like I sometimes equate it to like watching a fight at school, and like you want to jump in and break it up, but then you're going to get suspended by accident because you were in the fight.
Yeah.
And it seems like everyone's like, hey, you really shouldn't be doing this. This is pretty bad. You shouldn't shut down that power. You shouldn't be going into this country and invading them. But like, hey, I don't want to do anything. And then you're like, hey, buddy, hey, throw a right hook. Try that. Try to, hit him with an uppercut. And you're like, hey, it was just a suggestion. I'm not involved, And I think that's where we are, is we have, and I'll tell you what, when this thing started, Amit, okay, everyone was like, the Russian military is nothing to what they used to be. They have no power. They're using 30 and 40-year-old equipment, and they're getting crushed. They're showing videos of like, Stinger missiles hitting their ships and their planes. All true. The problem, though, is that wasn't their real power. That was their military, but their real power are those pipelines.
Yeah.
And it has been, in my belief personally, that it has been wildly miscalculated, the amount of power and preparation Russia had going into what's happening right now. They're proving a point that's very unfortunate for everyone in our part of the world, that they're prepared to do anything to keep this going, to ultimately get what they want and win. In the US, we can't even go 8 seconds without complaining about something. The Starbucks by my house is currently shut down because they're protesting their own store, because they don't want to get taken off of payroll when they go to school or leave their job. They want to be able to stay on the payroll, so they're striking right now. The irony of it was because I'm neither pro nor anti-union. I'm like, hey, union for the right jobs makes a ton of sense. Some jobs probably don't need it. I happened to ask someone, and I said, well, out of curiosity, how long are you going to strike? And they're like, oh, well, after Labor Day, we'll go back. I'm like, is this just you wanted a long weekend? I mean, what's really going on here? And I couldn't help but sort of think to myself, like, we'll look at that and we'll go and throw in some, automation, and we'll have a kiosk I order from her. They do 100% online ordering. There's a Chipotle near me that actually shut down ordering in stores, straight up online ordering only.
Yeah.
And as we're complaining about, I'm not, don't read into this as like I'm putting down the efforts they're making. Good for them for doing it. But we've got entire parts of the world that are like turning the wrench to shut off power to entire countries. And they're like, cool, we've got enough energy for eternity. And we can keep fighting for eternity. And if people complain, they get ignored.
So
how
do you think this ends? How do you think this is? Do we lift the sanctions? Like, who gives in?
I think behind the scenes, someone's going to bend the knee, and it's going to come across as an agreement publicly, like it was a battle and it was even, and we agreed to disagree, and they're going to pull out, and they're going to turn the stream back on. But I think the long-term issue here is, in an effort to make Russia look weak, we have almost reestablished them as a superpower from an energy perspective.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's true, but it certainly feels that way. And if people have not been around a long time and don't know the history of that part of the world, they certainly don't seem very weak for all the showboating and sort of the propaganda and the things we hear about. However, just sort of a funny off tick for this conversation, but still on it. Right before I jumped on here, I just saw a post that something like 50 or 60% of all the tweets or accounts related to Russia and Ukraine are bots.
Yeah.
60% are bots, dude. And it just goes to show that, it isn't always about having the newest plane or the fastest tank or the biggest boat. Sometimes it's about the size of your cybersecurity warfare team. And I think that that's an area that a lot of these other countries have been really focusing on as well. I think Europe has been infighting with itself within the EU. They've had austerity issues with certain countries. We've had Brexit, which weakened everybody and is still, frankly, a mess. Look at the UK. Look at the people in the UK. They're as far from Russia as you're going to get in terms of really, the European Union. And they're now paying 10x increases in price on energy because they decided to essentially not manage their own energy. And this all sort of harkens back to this idea of, well, we're fighting over $10,000 student loan relief, screaming about like, well, why would we give Ukraine anything? We don't realize that just 6 hours over the ocean, our friends and allies have nothing, and they're getting pounded. I don't mean to say nothing, but they're getting pounded on pricing. It's affecting them. And other parts of the world are dealing with this already, which just doesn't make it on the news.
So picking back from that, California is literally warning people that there are blackouts happening, telling them to not use the energy grid. Yeah. I mean, California is in a first world country, right? Like California is supposed to be like, how do we see California affecting at least the United States economy, given they're an economy in and of themselves?
It's a great call out. It's true. If you said to someone who's not from the U.S., when you think about the U.S., what do you think about? They're thinking like New York and Hollywood, Los Angeles, San Francisco, right? California. California's been doing this for years. Like the brownouts are nothing new. It's been going on forever. I think the big question is, and this is something you and I talk about often, is can someone just expressly, simply explain what exactly is broken, how we fix it, and what would have to happen in order for it to not happen again? This is sort of my approach to every problem in my life. Now, I'm being a little facetious. I can easily go and look this up and get all the information, but it begs the question of, this has been a recurring problem for decades. Is that a fair statement? I think probably fair, right? For decades. Why is it not fixed? Why can it not be fixed? And of course, the argument is, well, the growing population. But to be fair, though, California has not really had a huge growing population. People are leaving California, right? So it's not. I'm not saying it's like a negative number. Maybe it's net zero. Maybe it's a slight increase in population, but they're certainly not exploding in population.
Yes.
It just begs the question of like, is it a question of profit in companies, in private companies? Is it a question of mismanagement at the government level? Is it a question of an inability to find and source energy?
Does it feel similar to the homeless person problem? Like the fact that they can't solve that issue, the government literally had a surplus to the point where they were giving extra stimulus checks, but they can't solve that problem, seems to indicate that an infrastructure problem is way above their head if they can't solve a homeless person problem, and they have more money than most states combined together to be able to do it. I never understood the homeless person problem, by the way, Sean. I mean, you're a little bit older than me. You could probably shed some more light there. Like, I never got it. I don't understand why such a rich economy. Like, I understand the concept of homelessness. I don't understand the concept of. I don't know if you saw the other day on CNN did a piece that they're introducing a law that's going to force hotels to take in homeless people.
Man, that's like, I almost don't even want to talk about it.
But you heard about it, right? You heard about
Well, I've read the entire thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. For those who don't know what that is, and then we'll talk about the home. I think this is a good sort of, it's a great dichotomy that speaks to the macro issues that are, I got to throw this out there. I get comments on these videos of like, you shouldn't have this guy on the show. He's extreme. And I'm like, I would argue I'm not at all anywhere but the center, but so it goes. I have to laugh when I see that.
You're the least political person I know.
Well, it's just acknowledging that politics are involved. It's not the same as having a stance or pushing people towards a direction. I think that one thing has really increased over time is we've politicized everything. It could be homelessness, it could be mental health, it could be energy, it could be hotels and putting people in them. Okay, so if you're not up to date, for anyone who's listening, if you're not up to date on what happened, there was a bill that was being pushed heavily in California, in I believe San Francisco specifically, right? Yep. What they basically were saying was, if you are a hotel, you own a hotel, you're a national hotel chain, whatever, and you have rooms that are not currently occupied by hotel guests, you are going to be forced to give those rooms to homeless people at no charge. The problem is, like everything, nothing is that plain. Okay, there is a huge. You can both feel really bad about a situation and at the same time recognize that once again you're not root cause solutioning for the problem. Like the problem here was San Francisco's office space situation is getting out of control. They're going to have so many open office space areas that no one's going to be renting because San Francisco has gotten just absolutely smashed.
Yep.
I'll be there for a couple of weeks, and I leave in a few weeks. I'll be there for a few weeks, so I'll make sure I'll give some updates from the road there. But
closing some deals over there.
Got some stuff going on.
Got some stuff going on.
Yeah. Simply putting a person who's homeless in a hotel room that happens to be open one day. Well, what happens to guests if they're at a hotel and there's just a whole bunch of folks who are hanging out in the hotel who are homeless, or doing drugs in the hotel, or there's issues with mental health issues, right? None of these things am I saying is somehow on them or their fault. What I'm simply saying is, like, the solution is to just hide them away in a room to get them off the street and give them a safe place to go. Sure, that makes sense on the one hand. On the other hand, these hotels over time, people are going to be like, I'm not bringing my family here. I'm not going to stay here. Why am I paying to come to a hotel in San Francisco that is going to have probably additional security? They're probably going to have police officers there. They're going to have medical issues, not because these are bad people. That's just the nature of what it is. So it gets to the point of, like, where does it end? Like, if you have a 4-bedroom house and you have 3 people, you should be giving that extra bedroom away. If you make $5,000 a month, but you only need $4,300, well, you should get $700 should come out automatically to help some other random problem. And if someone's listening to this and you're thinking like, you're crazy, it's like, let me tell you, 95% of the things that are happening today, people thought were crazy 10 years ago, and they're not crazy anymore. And 10 years before that, and 10 years before that. I think part of the issue with the homelessness crisis can be broken down into a couple of categories. I am not a social worker. I'm not a professional in this space. This is just observations of a guy who's been around for a little while. When, I don't know the exact date, I'm going to go back, it's probably a couple of decades, when we basically made the decision in the US to get rid of mental health facilities across the board. We released all of these people who were in treatment for a number of things: drug addiction, extreme mental health issues, psychosis, you name it, right? We just one day were like, okay, well, these are no longer being run by the government. We got to shut them down. Let everybody go. And there was nowhere for these people to go. And so you end up with people who have no way of dealing with issues because they can't get the right drugs they need. So inevitably it turns into whatever drugs I can get to help with my pain or the headaches or the voices or whatever the case might be. And I'm not making this completely about mental health, but a good portion of it is people have mental health issues. Another huge portion of it is drug addiction and drug problems in general. And then there are a category of folks as well who, for one reason or another, perhaps just ended up in a tough situation, but it gets escalated because, as you sort of get further and further away from that state of good mental health, it starts to increase and get worse. And it isn't about a Democrat, it isn't about a Republican, it isn't about anything. The problem is we all know that the way you help these people is we need to understand, hey, the folks who are addicted to drugs, we need to find a way, number one, get them away from drugs into a safe place and get them somehow rehabbed and off. I'm not living in a dream world. I'm a very realistic person. I understand it's not going to work 100%, but you got to start with a root cause. Root cause is drug addiction. Drug addiction means you can't work. It means you have to commit crimes to get the money or do other things to get the money. You got to stop it in its tracks. That's one thing. Then you also have to understand and recognize that a lot of people have extreme mental health issues across the world. This isn't a California thing, across the world. We have to recognize that they're not going to get better because you give them a hotel room. They're not going to get better because you tell them to go and see someone once a month or be in a homeless shelter. We need to find a way to actually help these people. But the problem is drugs and mental health are both things we know how to treat. We have a myriad of therapies, both professional service and drug related for mental health issues. I'm not saying that's the solution 100%, but it helps with a good portion of it. And from the drug perspective, some of it is about treating it very much the same as you do a mental health issue, right? You treat it as a disease. You don't have to criminalize it, but you still have to recognize the fact that it has to be dealt with.
Yeah.
And dealing with drug addiction isn't making more places to do drugs, which is what California's done. Right? We're not talking about a methadone clinic. We're talking about like safe places to shoot up heroin and crack and whatnot, right? Like it's true. Where I live, you see it too. And the issues though, those are two really serious, really sad situations that are massive from the political perspective. Every politician in those areas is running on reducing crime and violence or decriminalizing crime and violence and drug addiction. And then, you notice no one ever talks about like getting homeless people back into society. It's about getting them off the streets, getting them into a better place. It's like, that's not sticking someone into a transient situation like a hotel room. I want you to think about this. You're a homeless person. I understand a hotel room, of course, seems much better. How do you get that person to leave that room the next morning? Who's the person doing that job? Yeah. Is it the person who makes $9 an hour in the hotel, which, right? I don't know what they get paid. I'm just throwing a number. Is it the house? Is it the room cleaner who's coming in saying like, hey, I noticed there's 14 needles on the ground. Could you please leave? And then they get shanked on the way out the door, right? And I'm being dramatic on purpose, but I don't think it's that dramatic, actually. I think that if you're going to fill up the Hilton with a whole bunch of folks who were living on the street the night before, if those people are smart, they're not going to leave. And why would they leave? Why you want me to move in for a night? So let me get this straight so I can have a bed tonight. And then you throw me in the street in the morning. Well, that's not the solution. And the problem is, Amit, the solution is going to be expensive. Yep. And it's going to take some time, and it's going to have to be a politically neutral thing that shouldn't cost anyone a position, good or bad. And we have to recognize as a society that when we're solving real and serious issues, this goes right back to the Nord Stream pipeline and energy, all the way down to homelessness and drug addiction. These are problems that need to be looked at from a global perspective, not a political lean or a local geographical perspective. And I think the reason people get so frustrated when we talk about anything in the macro is because it seems like you're ignoring the micro. But many of the micros are the affects of the macro.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's causation in all of this. We'll go and sue the makers of Oxy, but now there's 20,000 people living in the streets in San Francisco because they're addicted to Oxy and now can only get heroin. Okay, great. The dude's going to go to jail. Okay, great. There's a settlement. But we didn't solve the actual problem. That settlement needs to go towards hiring 1,000 social workers, putting them in San Francisco, putting together a hospital specifically to deal with pain addiction. Boom, you solve a problem. I know it's not perfect. I know it's not simple, but there are ways to help everybody. I talked on the video last week about this idea of not complaining. I know I'm off track slightly. We'll
No,
get
no,
back
you're
on
good.
track, but
You're good. That was a good one, by the way. People loved it.
I appreciate that. The reason why being positive and an optimist and not allowing complaining to stop you is because someone once in a while has to be the one who says, I don't give a crap if you are a Republican and I don't give a crap if you're a Democrat. Get out of my face. We're going to fix some problems. The issue is the people who have that mentality are not running for politics.
Yeah.
Why would you want to? And because there's no incentive, you're going to get lambasted every night of the week by both sides because you happen to be in the middle and you're just trying to solve problems. So it's a really it's a really interesting thing. And just because we're talking about macros, I think this is important to think about for a second. When I think about California, I think about its equal and opposite polar is probably Florida in a lot of ways. Ironically, both have great weather. They both have, they're on the coasts, right? They've got lots of water and access, and they both have very wealthy folks. And they also have a lot of drug problems, and they both have a lot of mental health problems, both have homeless problems. And it just goes to show that, like, whether it's the left or the right, or up or down, or extreme or not extreme, both have the same problems. They just paint them in different pictures and blame different things, but it's the same problem. And the great irony of this is, I don't even want to talk about Trump, who's completely lost it at this point, it would seem. But you've got like DeSantis and Newsom, which are, like, again, talk about two halves of the same coin who have completely, they're both known nationally. They're both taking completely different steps to doing things in their own areas. They both have massive economies. They're basically running their own small countries, essentially. And if not for Biden and Trump, my guess, I'm not a poli-sci person, but my guess would be you'd probably see Newsom versus DeSantis.
Yep.
When at the end of the day, aren't they both basically just the exact same person with a different color glass on, right? So, anyways, I went down a path I wasn't planning on going, but bring it all back.
Let me ask this last question, because I think this is a better topic than the last topic we had planned.
Sure.
If I'm 21 and I come to you as a mentor and I'm like, Sean, I want to change the world. And you're like, awesome. And then I'm like, should I go into politics or business? What would you say as like the most effective and fulfilling way you think to actually change the world?
I think that there are so many people in business that you'll never hear of who are changing the world. And these are the people who are doing things that go very unnoticed, right? I think that the world has to have politicians. I mean, I sort of hate that it does, but it does have to have politicians, right? And I think the world also needs silent solvers and creators, people who are just waking up every day, they're looking at problems, they're figuring out, okay, these are the top 10 problems for children, these are the top 10 problems for elderly people, these are the top 10 problems for women, for a minority, for whatever category we want to break it down into, and they're thinking about how they can solve for that. And I think that people who have both empathy and drive are the best people a country can have. And I think we have a lot of those people in this country who are silently going out, and what they're doing is, maybe it's people who own real estate, but they're keeping the prices low and the house is nice and clean and safe. Maybe it's people who are creating better access to educational materials. Maybe it's folks who are providing needles that retract the blade so other people won't get stuck and get a disease. Maybe it's people who are coming up with a better way of making the next Narcan, right? I think that there is a mega, I've said this before, like the actual middle of the actual world, right? The real bell curve, not the extreme 10%, are primarily made of people who are like, look, I want to live in a nice society. I would love to see things get better. I don't care which way you lean. The problem is it's very hard to locate where within that spectrum the people who want to put in the effort, do the work, and be selfless about it. I think a lot of them exist. I feel like I know a lot of them. They'll never get credit. They don't want credit. They're not looking for credit. But I also think that, like, sometimes the issue can be, the reason I'm saying that they're unknown is not an accident. I'm not just randomly saying that. There hits a point where you become so big, you become a political figurehead, even if not on purpose.
Yeah.
If I say Bill Gates, who has given tens of billions of dollars to the world, well, that's true, but maybe he still is someone that people see as like, hey, did he really go to Epstein Island? Did he really do these bad things? Like, I don't know. You talk about Elon, my God, you think the guy was like launching dragons on society, killing people the way people talk about this guy like he's pure evil, right? Like it doesn't matter what good he does, he's drowned out by hatred. Name your top 0.01 percenter, right? People are going to hate them.
Do you also think politics is too slow? Like you got to campaign, you got to get votes, whereas business, you can immediately make an impact. And like,
So this is a really funny God. If I tell when I tell my wife later, I brought this up on a podcast with you, man, she's gonna not believe it. Have you ever seen the show Eastbound and Down?
no.
Okay. This has nothing to do with the show. It's a hilarious show that 100% could never be made today. Let's just be totally clear. It's Kenny Powers. So the only reason I'm bringing this up funny, he has a jet ski, and I always think about the jet ski in this show. When you think about government, it's not just a question of like I have to somehow turn this aircraft carrier around. It's like I need to have 2 years of planning to decide if I'm going to turn it around.
Yep.
Then if once I've decided, I have to have 2 years of planning on who's going to do it. Then after we do that, we have to do an ecological study for 2 years, and then a societal study, and then a prosperity study. And then all the while we've run out of gas, it hasn't been maintained, and now we have to build a new ship so we can turn it around in the first place.
Yep.
And then when it's finally built and ready to be turned around, another party comes in and gets voted out, and they're like, we were facing the right way all along, turn it back. So I think the reality is a small business owner, because you don't have to be huge, small business owner is a jet ski, right? They can whip around that giant ship 1,000 times in any direction they want. They can jump over it. They can go, I don't know, under it, I suppose, like whatever. That's the way we have to be. We have to be nimble, and we have to be based on solving for problems that are in front of us. That's the missing link to almost everything you hear about on TV. I don't care. I get just because I think it relates. I'm now seeing CNN trending as cancel CNN bans. Now they're a Republican channel. I'm like, oh my Lord, God, holy moly! When CNN is being said to be too far right, that's when I'm like, what is going on politically in the world right now? I can't even make sense of it. And this is the whole entire thing that you're asking is like, is it too hard for governments to do stuff? Yeah, because everything is done to get votes on both sides. It's total equality. They're going to say and do whatever it takes to get votes so that they have a chance of winning. That is the name of the game of politics. But while they all fight and get on TV and get the airtime, guys like you and me who go out and do our own things and have employees and try to generate profits and put those profits back into the areas we live, nothing happens. I'll give you a true story because I think this is really relevant. There's a building near me that's been vacant now for a long time, and it's starting to look pretty bad. Okay, it's a commercial property. My buddy is a commercial realtor. I said, hey, dude, can you get me in there? I want to take a look at it. It's across from a brand new fire station. It's right off the highway. It could be a beautiful local spot. And I was like, look, I don't even know what I want to do with it. But if I could get in there and turn it into like, I'm not even talking about making money with it. It's in the town I live in, and I'm not trying to crap where I eat. Okay. I was like, you can make it into an ice cream store, a cafe, maybe a general store, something that cutesy for the town. The kids can come and get penny candy, stuff like that, whatever. Hire all the kids from the high school to work there. Just try to basically break even on it. We go in, it's in terrible shape. So the first observation I have is it's going to require someone who actually knows what they're doing. Okay, I check that box. It's going to require someone who's also connected, knows how to raise their own money because no one else is going to pay for this dump, and has to have the capital and the willpower to want to make this better. Check and check. I'm good to go. We're walking through, every floor is worse. The roof is in bad shape. There's a hole in one of the roof has been leaking apparently for a long time. So it's some bad situation. So whoever buys this is going to have to put in way more money than it's going to be worth. So you have to do it because you want to do something good for your community.
Right.
When we finally leave, I'm like, okay, I'll consider an offer, but it's going to have to be low. There's a special freaking addendum that says I don't want to say the name because it could be taken the wrong way. There's a group in the town who, for whatever reason, was written into the bylaws, will have a say in what you're allowed to do or run from the business.
Wow.
So you have to go in front of a committee and get their approval, and then they get to pick the design. And I was like, no, let it fall down. When it falls to the ground and there's nothing left but a hole, I'll buy the hole and I'll put something there myself. And now here we are 6 months later, still going on years. 6 months later, the grass is now 3 feet high. You can see animals are coming in and out of the roof. and that building to me is everything that we have just talked about.
Yep.
Plenty of people are saying, I want to do the right thing and I don't even need the money. I will do it myself. I will make it a nice place. I'll even give it back, lease it back to the town somehow for break even, whatever. But the policies can't get out of their own way. And they don't want them because they want power. They don't want to buy the building, Amit. They don't want to buy the building. They don't want to use their own money. They don't want to come up with the idea, and they don't want to come up with a plan. But they want control over the person who buys it because it's about control. So it's one of those things where it's like, my gosh, you even get in the way of people trying to do good things, to your point. And so, yeah, it's like we're trying to turn around an aircraft carrier, but we don't know why. We don't know who's going to do it. We don't know how to do it, but we're still going to try to do it until someone tells us to stop and go back. And that's where we are a lot of times, the way we do things globally, not just in the US, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I look at you, not to belabor it, but like, we both live on the East Coast. You're in Jersey. Jersey's the same way, man. Like, you know, it's a tough situation. And I think the problem is many of the things and the rules that we put in place have great ideas behind them, right? Like, I'll give you a perfect example, one that I think about all the time is rent controls and rent restrictions. As someone who rents for low pricing, I don't get affected by any of this, thankfully. But at the same time, and by the way, I'm not making excuses for people who gouge people either. They can go, you know, F themselves. They want to rip people off. I have no place for people like that in my life. But what I'm saying is, at the same politicians who are like, hey, you are not allowed to raise rents more than, you know, 0.5% or 1%. Will then raise your taxes 3%.
Yeah.
You know, and it creates a problem because the tenants are like, look, I want to live here. I just can't keep paying more. And the owner of the property a lot of times is like, I don't make what you think I make by renting this out. and what happens is, like, they're like, increase 0.5, taxes go up 3%. Okay, well, next year increase by 0.5. It's only up 2% this year. It's like, well, wait a minute, I'm losing more and more money every year, and you're telling me what I can and can't do with it. And I think that it's a classic example of like, we create programs to solve for a problem, but we ignore the ripple effect of all of the other problems because that's not politically going to strengthen the argument for the first problem.
So the answer is go into business.
The answer is, you know, maybe go into politics after you go into business.
Which is what all of them do anyway, right? They're like, right.
I mean, listen, the people in Congress are wealthier than the people running the businesses.
Well, it goes back to your point. It's like, after you've done what you want to do to change the world, now maybe selfishly you want power, and that comes through politics. And, you know,
if there's a soundbite you're going to get from anything, everyone thinks that they want money until they realize they don't have power. Power makes money look like nothing, and that's what drives almost all the problems we face on a day-to-day basis in the world. That's my 2 cents.
I think that's how we end it. That's awesome. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching Not Financial Advice. Let us know in the comments. Do you want to pick politics or do you want to pick business if you had to go change the world? We'll see you next week.
See you, everybody.